I want to say thank you for being inspiring members of our community. Your work in our community makes Spokane, the region, the country, and the world what it is, and your work is what is desperately needed in times when we're struggling so much, as you all too well know. So we're going to start our conference engaging with Communities for Justice, the work that all of us aspire to do better every time we have an opportunity to engage. So regardless if you're here as an academic, as a practitioner, as a presenter, as a student, as a human being, thank you for doing the work that you do and for continuing to learn as we go through the conference today. My name is Christine Hoover. I'm the director for the Gonzaga Institute of Hate Studies. The Institute is nearly 20 years old. The Institute started almost 20 years ago in 1997, 1998, and we'll be recognizing 20 years worth of work next October. So just a little bit of a commercial to say, great to see you this year. It will be great, hopefully, to see you again next year at about this time. But this morning, we have some work to do in our opening plenary session with a very special guest that's with us. Our agenda for the conference is available online. These are the instructions that will help you access that. If you'd like to see more additional information about the biographies of our speakers, the abstracts of their presentations, you can see it both at a website as well as through an app. And we have a 2-page handout that's also available outside the store that will tell you basically where every session is, and you'll be able to find your way around the building. All the sessions for our conference are in this building, except for the sessions that focus on the human rights internships. If you're here as a community partner and you would like to know how to have internships focused on human rights, our career and professional development folks are waiting to see you in session 1. So you'd be welcome to join us by the elevator and we'll walk to their session in their building, but other than that, all the rest of the sessions are here. I have a little bit of information that is beyond logistics that I'd like to share with you in terms of not only welcoming you, but also we have something called the Eva Lastman Take Action Against Hate Award. In recognizing the significant work that members of this community, large and small, have done, I'd like to share with you a little bit about what the Eva Lastman Take Action Against Hate Award stands for and what it means. Eva Lastman was a survivor of the Nazi Holocaust who spent the latter years of her life speaking out against hatred and bigotry in the inland Northwest. She came to Spokane in 1949 with her late husband, Walter Wolf Lastman, who was also a Holocaust survivor. She was born in Poland on March 28th in 1919 to an Orthodox Jewish family. Eva Lastman fled to Warsaw following the Nazi invasion and held out there with other Jews for more than 3 years. She was captured by the Germans following an unsuccessful uprising in the Warsaw Ghetto and shipped to the death camp. She was forced into labor because she was relatively young and healthy. When she became ill, she sought help from a doctor who secretly told her to run from the infirmary. If the Nazis had known she was sick, they would have killed her. She met her husband, Walter Wolf Lastman, at a survivor camp south of Germany following the war. Over the years, she was outspoken about the horrors of the Holocaust and had been recognized numerous times for her ongoing efforts to warn the public about the insidiousness of hate. She appeared repeatedly at community events and was especially driven to deliver her message of tolerance to school children. In 2006, she wrote in the Spokesman Review, "I am a Holocaust survivor and know firsthand how vicious propaganda incites hate." In 2002, Lastman was awarded a presidential commendation for her work by Whitworth College, now Whitworth University, and Gonzaga gave her an honorary Doctor of Laws degree in 2002. She was a leader of the creation in 2005 of the Spokane Community Holocaust Memorial next to Temple Beth Shalom. In 2006, she received the Carl Maxey Racial Justice Award for the YWCA, and she was given the first Eva Lastman Award from Gonzaga University Institute for Hate Studies in 2009. So it is my pleasure to ask Joanne Smicha to come up to the podium and to help us present the award to the International Network for Hate Studies for 2017 for the Eva Lastman Take Action Against Hate Award. Our guest who is receiving this award is here with us from Limerick, Ireland, and she is here with us electronically. So I'm going to pull her up on the screen. Okay. It'll take just a moment for us to get her up here on the screen so that she can receive the award. This is the award that Joanne is holding for our 2017 honoree. I'll tell you a little bit about the Institute while we get the director's picture up here. The International Network for Hate Studies was set up in 2013. It's a cross-jurisdictional and interdisciplinary organism that aims to facilitate the exchange of knowledge about the study of hate and hate crimes. Hate has no borders, and with the proliferation of online sources and resources, its study needs a multidisciplinary and international focus, as well as one which examines local and jurisdiction-specific causes and responses. For this work, Jennifer Schwepp, who is co-director of the International Network for Hate Studies, is here with us over here to receive the award. Jennifer, would you like to say a few words?
I would, please, Christine, if you don't mind indulging me. Hello, everyone, from a very wet and windy Limerick in Ireland. I'd like to start off just by thanking Christine and all at the Institute so much for this really extraordinary honour that you are bestowing upon us. Dr. Mark Walters, my co-director, and I are absolutely delighted and privileged to receive this award on behalf of the International Network for Hate Studies, and the advisory board and its chairpersons have also asked that we pass on our thanks for this really extraordinary recognition. To receive an award named in honour of Eva Lastman, whose extraordinary resilience, generosity and courage did so much to expose us to the atrocities of hate internationally, really makes the award so special to us. Personally, the award means a lot to me, given the incredibly happy time and memories I have of spending time at the Gonzaga Law School and with the Institute a number of years ago, around the time of the second Gonzaga conference. And I was so disappointed that I couldn't travel to be there with you for what I know will be an incredibly exciting conference. The Gonzaga Conference are typified by amazing energy, positivity, support, and invigoration, and I know that you're all going to have an amazing few days. I'd just like to take a few moments to discuss the INHS and the theme of the conference. The theme really resonated with Mark and I, because engagement within the Academy, as well as between the Academy, civil society, policymakers and practitioners, is at the heart of our personal research philosophies and characterises the work that we do nationally and of course internationally with the INHS. In our national context, we at the University of Limerick and Dr. Mark Walters at Sussex University engage in cross-disciplinary scholarly research in hate studies, which has a clear policy focus. And utilising mixed research methods, we work closely with our partners in policy and practice to uncover, critique and explore the legislative regimes governing hate crime and work with our partners in developing these responses. And so we took these personal philosophies and policies to our desire to create an international space in which policymakers, practitioners and academics could engage with one another in seeking to understand, problematise and combat hate globally. As Christine mentioned, the network was established in 2013, so we're still quite young. It is cross-jurisdictional, it's interdisciplinary, and our aim is to facilitate the exchange of knowledge about the study of hate and hate crime. The network has 4 key aims and objectives: information sharing, public policy engagement, collaboration in research, and understanding hate. So we go not just beyond the communities of our own discipline and practice contexts, But we also move beyond our jurisdictional communities, learning from one another, and as your conference would ask, engaging with one another. Physically, we do this through the INHS conference, which maps onto the Gonzaga conferences, and also through our website. And what's central to the INHS is the rejection of what a number of scholars, including Chakraborty and Garland and Mason Bish, have referred to as the silo approach to hate crime. And I know, again, this is something which is deeply embedded in the work of the Gonzaga Institute as well. So in this context, we were delighted to read the theme of your conference because it encapsulates everything that we in the INHS hold central to our policies, our practices, and our philosophies. We believe that engaging with colleagues beyond our community disciplines, practices and jurisdictions towards addressing hate crime is really vitally important, and it makes the conference over the next couple of days so incredibly relevant and important. Exactly what justice means in this context is an equally important question, and I know that it will be critically explored over the next few days, and I look forward to hearing all about it and reading about these discussions and maybe following them on Twitter if you have a hashtag or if people are tweeting. So in closing, I'd just like once more to say that Dr. Walters and I are absolutely so privileged and so humbled to receive this award on behalf of the INHS. The INHS is an awful lot more than Mark and I. We work with an advisory board which comprises of academics, practitioners and policymakers across the globe. It's chaired by Professor Barbara Perry, who I know is known to probably everyone in the room, and Maurice Tomlinson, all of whom make the work of the INHS possible. So thank you again from the bottom of our hearts, and I really hope to visit you all very soon in Gonzaga and meet up with you again soon. So thank you.
Thank you. So anyone who knows me knows that I like surprises, which is a little bit of a contradiction because I'm also very much of a logistics, organized, straightforward facts kind of person. But in these little joys, we have a surprise for our second award winner. Our second award winner will be Ken Stern. Is Ken here? Ken? This is a surprise for Ken. Ken had no idea that we were going to do this for him. We have benefited in such extraordinary ways from Ken's presence. If you'd like to come up. Ken has been working with us. He came to us from New York to be here for this conference, and he has been working with the Institute since its inception to provide invaluable support. He's an award-winning author and attorney and was most recently director of the Division on Anti-Semitism and Extremism at the American Jewish Committee, where he worked for 25 years. Mr. Stern's op-eds and book reviews have appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, USA Today, The Forward, the Jewish Telegraphic Agency, and elsewhere. Mr. Stern has appeared on the CBS Evening News, Dateline, Nightline, the History Channel, PBS, and many other television and radio programs. He's argued before the United States Supreme Court, testified before Congress, and was an invited presenter at the White House Conference on Hate Crimes and served as a member of the U.S. delegation to the Stockholm Forum on Combating Hate. Now, as I mentioned, we did not give him any forewarning that we were going to recognize the incredible support that he has provided us for so many years. But with his dossier, I think you might recognize that he could say a few words extemporaneously.
It's a pleasure to meet you.
So nice to meet you. Thank you for being such a good soul.
This is a surprise. Actually, it's a shock. And it's the first time I met Christine, and it's great to see Jim. And you know, I am somewhat speechless, but I will find the capacity to say a few words. You know, I think there's so many more people here and elsewhere who are deserving of this, but it's especially heartwarming, to receive something that's named for Eva Lassmer, because I got to know her because of the people at Gonzaga, and when she was in her later years, I would come here, I would go visit her. She was inspiring, and she, it was just in her heart to do whatever she could. And I remember, thinking this old Jewish lady, and there was an issue here, I forget exactly, but it was like an anti-gay issue, and she wrote something in the paper. I said, wow, this, she gets it in ways that lots of other people don't, in terms of how hatred goes across platforms and how it affects everybody and how everybody has to stand up. And I think that's the message of the work that we've been doing here, for 20 years now, hard as that is to believe that it's been 20 years. And I want to say, a thanks to Gonzaga, too. Some of you know the sort of the backstory to how the Institute happened, and I know George Critchlow isn't here, will be here tonight, was part of it, and many, many others. But there was a guy named Bill Wasmuth. How many people here know the name Bill Wasmuth? Okay. So Bill, for those of you who know, was a pioneer in pushing back against hatred. He was a parish priest in Coeur d'Alene, had his house firebombed with him in it by the Aryan nations. And Bill and I knew each other and talked about precisely some of the concerns that you heard from the other recipient from across the ocean, that there was no capacity in the academic community to think through on an interdisciplinary level, how do you focus on hatred, and how do you have that inform policy, not just for hate crime, but for all aspects of hatred in society. And Bill took it upon himself, he was the head of the Northwest Coalition at the time, to try to find an academic home. And he went to various places. I remember University of Oregon. It's a great idea, where's the money? And so when we said, well, we don't have any, they said, thank you very much. Gonzaga was inspired by the idea and took it to home and decided to really build around it and to do it for 20 years. And certainly, people like Raymond Reyes and others at critical times made sure that we were moving forward. So, standing here 20 years later, after those first initial meetings, and Joe, I remember that first meeting where we talked about it, your colleague Morris Dees was in the room with me, and Bill Wasmuth's meeting with some faculty here, so there's very much a tie-in to what you're about to say. But the real lasting part of this is that the work continues. The work is actually probably more important today than ever, and I think that it's just so wonderful that what this group has done not only impacts the Gonzaga community and the academic community nationally, but you see offshoots like the group in Limerick, Ireland now picking up this mantle too. So I'm surprised and honored, and this is a labor of love for me, and we will continue for as long as we all can together to try to make a world a lot more thoughtful about how it understands hatred and what it does about it to reduce it, because we've had hatred as long as people have been around. We will always have hatred, but how we manage it is up to us. Anyway, thank you again so much for this wonderful honor.
Thank you. I'd like to invite Jim Moore to the podium, who is going to introduce and welcome our keynote speaker, and be with us in just a moment. Jim?
So it's a real honor to get to introduce Joe Levin to the conference here. He is the co-founder of the Southern Poverty Law Center, which has been actually an organization that I have known for a long time and used to connect with them when I used to teach in middle school and high school and get their materials, because I always thought it was very important to teach these kind of topics, and they made it easy because I could grab materials and use those. So I've always appreciated what the Southern Poverty Law Center and its teaching tolerance arm would do. Now, Joe Levin has been very involved. He is what I would simply call a civil rights and equality champion for decades. He's been there. He has worked to shut down some of the most violent white supremacist groups all over the country. He has reformed juvenile justice laws and policies. He's worked to protect immigrant workers from exploitation, and he's really done a tremendous amount through his work, his position, his passion to shatter the barriers to equality for women, the LGBT population, people with disabilities, children, women. He's been a champion for decades, and it's an honor to bring him up to talk about the history then and now and where we're going. So please welcome Joe Levin to the stage.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Christine. Everybody hear me okay? It's all right? Okay. This is one of the earliest. I've given a lot of talks over the last 8 or 9 months, as you might imagine. This is the earliest morning talk I've given, so we'll see. That's my excuse, so you'll know that. And congratulations to the award recipients. Great work all around. And by the way, the credit that Jim was giving to me for everything having to do with our immigration work and everything else, that's the Southern Poverty Law Center. That's the literally hundreds of people who work there now, who bring this stuff into the real world. But I'm happy to take the credit, Jim. That's okay. The world changed in a shocking way November the 8th. Donald Trump, a man who relied upon anger, bigotry, lying, and fear-mongering to fuel his entire campaign, is now President of the United States. We're experiencing exactly what this historic transformation means. 1 week after the election, something that had been scheduled for a couple of months, I spoke to the National Council of Jewish Women in Cincinnati. Actually, it's in Cleveland. I was in Cincinnati recently. I get them all confused. The topic was supposed to be implicit bias. That's not where I went then, and that's not where I'm going this morning. Arguably, over the last 2 years, we're back to an era where bias, especially the rejection of diversity, is not just hidden in the larger population, it is open and it is extensive. What the Southern Poverty Law Center observed during that campaign and since the election and inauguration has been an invigoration of extremists and extremist groups ranging from old Klan leaders to neo-Nazis and other white supremacists and radical anti-immigrant groups. They feel validated. So I'd like to talk a bit about the history I experienced, one of explicit bias that I believe provides a valuable lesson for the present. My good friend and SPLC co-founder, Morris Dees, was raised on a farm in rural Montgomery. I grew up in what would pass back then for suburban Montgomery. While I was worried about my Little League baseball career, Morris was working at becoming an accomplished rodeo rider. You could say that he rode Western and I rode English. So we grew up under very different circumstances, but the culture of racism we shared and the earth-shaking events that occurred in Montgomery and the South during the 1950s and 1960s were the threads that brought us together. His dad ran a cotton farm, mine was a lawyer. He was a Baptist, I was a Jew. But what we did have in common, although he's 6 years my elder, was we were both white, went to the same all-white high school, the same all-white university, and the same all-white law school. I was born in 1943. My father was Jewish, a native of Newport News, Virginia. In 1882, my great-grandparents, Isaac and Annie Lippman, ages 16 and 15 at the time, and married, walked from Odessa, Russia to Bremen, Germany. They were escaping the ethnic cleansing instituted by Alexander III. Alexander III succeeded his father, and like many of the Romanovs, had a global vision for Russia. He was committed to making Russia great again. Through intense nationalistic and isolationist policies. This may sound familiar. My dad had an easier trip. He migrated to the University of Alabama in 1934 and graduated from its law school. He moved to Montgomery to practice law with a colleague and has eventually established his own commercial practice. My mother, Ann Hutto, was born in Jasper, Alabama, a descendant of generations of farmers. She was the youngest of 14 siblings. She moved to Montgomery, met my father, and they married. My mother was raised a Baptist but converted to Judaism. On her side, the Ottos, as they were known when they immigrated from Germany to South Carolina around 1735, may have left Germany because of the religious persecution of Lutherans. It's not entirely clear. It could have been a land grant issue. My great-grandfather, John C. Hutto, was a major in the Confederate Army. There's a Sons of Confederate Veterans camp named for him in Walker County, Alabama. I heard a lot about Johnny Reb from my uncles growing up. It was part of my heritage. I could not have imagined that the Confederacy and its symbols would rise again to such prominence. I never knew anything as a kid but Jim Crow segregation. Racially separate water fountains formed a metaphor for the culture. Every white person I knew was a racist. So was I. And just in case you might think that growing up Jewish made a difference, it didn't. Jews as a group were just as bigoted as anyone else. Those who weren't, a couple of Yankee rabbis, were run out of town by their congregations. Assimilation was the name of the game. In 1955, the bus boycott occurred. I was 12 years old, and until then, I rode the bus all the time. The day the boycott began was the last day I ever rode public transportation in Montgomery. Conversations included discussions of outside agitators and Yankee trash stirring up the Negroes. The city proceeded to close down the public parks and concrete in the public pools in order to avoid court-ordered desegregation. The atmosphere in Montgomery was poisonous. There was little justice, and some of the lawyers and judges were the worst offenders. Judge Walter B. Jones, a Montgomery County Circuit Court judge, was a vicious racist. In 1957, 6 years before his death, Jones published his most infamous editorial in the local newspaper, the Montgomery Advertiser, where he was a frequent commentator. It was entitled, "I Speak for the White Race." And sadly, for his time, and maybe ours, I think he did. He concluded his racist diatribe with the following words: "We have all kindly feelings for the world's other races, but we will maintain at any and all sacrifices the purity of our blood strain and race. We shall never submit to the demands of integrationists. The white race shall remain forever white." If this sounds familiar, this is the voice of white supremacy and the alt-right of Stephen Bannon today. Not 1957, today. Sounds pretty harsh. This was our environment. It was one of the perversion of law, an oligarchy with wealth and power concentrated in the hands of a few who played on racism to keep working class whites thinking about something else. The clarion call was states' rights, states' rights, states' rights. Again, does this sound familiar? You might think that that was surely my motivation to get a law degree and work to correct the vast injustices that I saw all around me. As a noted author, Annalise Dean put it, there are very few human beings who receive the truth by instant illumination. Most of them acquire it fragment by fragment. When I left my lily white public schools of Montgomery in 1960, I entered the all-white University of Alabama and joined my all-white Jewish fraternity. We had Jewish fraternities then for Southern Reform Jews, Southern Conservative Jews, and of course, Yankee Jews. No line was left undrawn. We thrilled to our all-white football team. Barry Bryant had been there about 2 years at that point. It gave us the opportunity to refight the War of Northern Aggression and show solidarity with George Wallace. In my junior years, 1962, Melvin Meyer, he was from Starkville, Mississippi, he was the editor of the Crimson White, the school newspaper. He wrote a Crimson White editorial supporting integration. Now, he was talking about the integration of the University of Mississippi by James Meredith. It resulted in a barrage of hate calls to the fraternity house where most of us lived at the time. And one morning, about 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, there was a disturbance in the house, woke me up, I went downstairs. In the front yard, there was a 10-foot cross burning. That cross had been put there by the United Klans of America, which was headquartered in Tuscaloosa at the time. I should point out that several decades later, the Southern Poverty Law Center sued the United Klans of America for basically causing the death of a young man in Mobile who was murdered by a couple of their members. And we got a multi-million dollar verdict, put the Klan group out of business, confiscated their property, sold it, and gave the money to the young man's mother. But back in the day, the Klan was mad at Melvin. I and many of my contemporaries at the university were mad at Melvin. After all, he was interrupting our lives of football and partying, and to some degree studying. Not much. And in my hometown, interestingly enough, the Jews were mad at Melvin, wondering why we tolerated such a radical in our midst. It was quite a combination of critics. What Melvin wrote and the way I and others reacted to it changed the course of my thinking and began to alter my view of the world. So in 1966, I graduated from law school. I went to Fort Benning, Georgia for basic officers training. Back in the day, unless you were a draft dodger, like Dick Cheney and Donald Trump, and yes, Bill Clinton, you likely got drafted, you enlisted, or like me, you came out of college, law school, graduate school, and you had it with a 2-year ROTC obligation. For me, I was in Army intelligence. I finished my basic infantry officer training at Fort Benning, Georgia, went to military intelligence school at Fort Holabird, Maryland, which is no longer there, for 6 weeks, and was prepared to go straight to Vietnam, which is where virtually all of my military colleagues had gone. Well, the Army sent me to Manhattan. We don't have time for that story. But what I did get out of my 2 years in the city was a sense of the larger world, a sense of diversity, a sense of working with people who weren't just like me and weren't just like the black and white division community, divided community that I grew up with in Montgomery. So it brought me to that last fragment that Melvin had started 7 years earlier. Serendipity intervened in 1969. I returned to Montgomery and met Morris Dees. We tried some cases together, started a law firm in 1971 with the help and encouragement of the late Julian Bond, who served as our first president, established the Southern Poverty Law Center. I was very lucky. I found a use for my law degree that I never could have imagined. In its first decade, the SPLC desegregated the all-white Alabama State Trooper Force. That's the force George Wallace used at the Edmund Pettus Bridge and the Selma to Montgomery March. Created an Alabama legislature that went from 1 black representative in 1972 to 19 by 1974, desegregated the Montgomery YMCA, which had entered into a secret agreement with the city to essentially act as a public recreational provider for its white residents, required the U.S. military to treat male and female service members equally in the provision of benefits, stopped the federal government from funding forced sterilizations of poor women, and that's it. Litigation was the primary focus of those early years. But as the 80s and 90s rolled into view, the center established Klan Watch. That's the predecessor organization to our current Intelligence Project. The Intelligence Project operates as a check on the activities of a broad array of hate groups and as a resource for law enforcement at all levels of government. We file cases against hate groups in Texas, Alabama, North Carolina, Kentucky, Idaho, Coeur d'Alene, and Oregon. In 1992, the center initiated its Teaching Tolerance program, which Jim referenced. Among many other activities, it distributes tolerance material and award-winning video and text kits free of charge to schools all over the country, and as I learned early this morning, also to schools in Canada. We also built the Civil Rights Memorial, designed by Maya Lin and dedicated to the martyrs of the Civil Rights Movement. So we arrive in the 21st century with all the proven programs in place and others underway. There's our Juvenile Justice Initiative operating in Florida, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama, taking unprecedented steps to improve the lives of children caught in the school-to-prison pipeline. Our Immigrant Justice Project, which is fighting for the rights of immigrant labor throughout the South and the nation through litigation and legislative action. How that mission has changed over the last 9 months. We went from worrying mainly about the way in which documented and undocumented immigrants were being treated by big agriculture, big timber in the South, to a swelling of incarceration and deportation that it's like the rise of the Confederacy, and I never could have imagined that we would be here. We've recently established our Southeast Immigrant Freedom Initiative, the purpose of which is to provide representation to the thousands of immigrants being shoved into deportation detention centers around the country. If anybody here is interested in perhaps participating in that, you might go online and you can find it on the Southern Poverty Law Center website. We now have operations going to detention centers, 2 detention centers in Atlanta and 1 in Louisiana, and we're trying to expand it significantly. We have an extensive LGBT rights project, which includes litigation that has successfully struck down, debunked conversion therapy programs, and ensured military benefits to same-sex couples, and again, much more. As I prepared this talk and looked back over the last 46 years and thought about where we started and where we are as a country now, it brings me back to my main point. Where the hell are we? What country is this? I thought the stories of bigotry and hate were relegated to the fringes of society. I see, smell, and feel the 1950s and 1960s. In 1920, H.L. Mencken wrote this, and I quote, "As democracy is perfected, the office of the president represents more and more closely the inner soul of the people. On some great and glorious day, the plain folks of the land will reach their heart's desire at last, and the White House will be occupied by a downright fool and a complete narcissistic moron." A recent Washington Post ABC News survey revealed that almost 10%, 9+% of Americans believe it is acceptable to hold white supremacist or neo-Nazi views. This poll was taken after Charlottesville. That's 30 million people who strongly agreed with that statement. More frightening to me was that 41% had no opinion. Really, again, after Charlottesville, and 41% had no opinion on that issue. 42%, in my opinion correctly, thought that Trump had put neo-Nazis and white supremacists on an equal standing with those who oppose them. Even more recently, Newsweek reported on a poll conducted jointly by Reuters and Ipsos in conjunction with the University of Virginia's Center for Politics. It found, among other things, that 31% of respondents said that they strongly or somewhat agreed that the country needs to, and I quote, "protect and preserve its white European heritage." 39% strongly or somewhat agreed that white people are currently under attack in the country. Nearly a third of the respondents failed to express support for interracial marriage, with 16% agreeing, and I quote, that marriage should only be allowed between two people of the same race. 14% neither agreed or disagreed, and 4% said they didn't know. An analysis by the pollsters found that those who gave indifferent answers were more likely to have views that leaned more toward intolerance than away from it. Larry Sabato, who's the director of the UVA Center, he said this. He said, "Let's remember there are 250 adults in the U.S., so even small percentages likely represent the beliefs of millions." So what is the inner soul of our people? Those who are most at risk: undocumented immigrants, people of color, religious minorities, especially American Muslims, everyone in the LGBT community, women who deserve control of their own bodies have every right to be afraid. This kind of overt bigotry has been justified by our president, his vice president, and their various surrogates. The extremist and alt-right elements of our country feel as if their positions regarding white supremacy, anti-Semitism, hate of LGBT individuals, xenophobia, and misogyny have been fully validated. These views have only been enhanced by Trump's behavior and words are important, following Charlottesville. Even before Charlottesville, Kevin McDonald, an outspoken anti-Semite and former professor, wrote this: "This is an amazing victory," talking about theologian. "Fundamentally, it is a victory of white people over the oligarchic, hostile elites." Andrew Anglin, proprietor of the Daily Stormer, which is a vicious website that's extremely popular among neo-Nazis, declared this: "Our glorious leader has ascended to God Emperor. Make no mistake about it, we did this." White nationalist leader Richard Spencer praised Trump's statement commemorating International Holocaust Memorial Day that intentionally failed to make any reference to Jews. He called it, and I quote, "the de-Judification of the Holocaust." And former Klansman David Duke, about whom Trump once claimed to know nothing, said, "President Trump is off to an amazing start. God bless him for it. We simply want our own country and our own society." Now, all of that occurred before Charlottesville, which only strengthened white supremacist views of Trump's support for them and their dogma. The number of hate groups operating in the country in 2016 remained near historic highs. It moved from 892 to 2015. I'm sorry, to 917 last year. From 892 in 2015 to 917 last year. That's our latest count. That's in 30 years of counts. It's only about 100 and fewer hate groups that we counted in 2011, which was our highest tally ever. And the numbers undoubtedly understate the real level of organized hatred in America. In recent years, growing numbers of right-wing extremists operate mainly in cyberspace, until in some cases, their followers take action in the real world. Dylan Roof, who murdered 9 black churchgoers, is an example of that. He had no real-world contact with hate groups before deciding, based upon propaganda that he read on the internet, that it was time to start a race war. By far, the most dramatic change we saw in hate groups was the enormous leap in anti-Muslim hate groups. It went from 34 in 2015 to 101 last year. That's a 197% increase. Anti-Muslim hate has been expanding rapidly for more than 2 years now, driven in large part by the incendiary rhetoric of Trump. As the SPLC reported, in the first 3 months after Trump won the presidency, we recorded an astonishing 1,372 hate incidents. Nearly all of them were election-related. A deep dive into the data reveals that nearly half of these incidents involve people referencing Trump either by name or by parroting his rhetoric. For example, groups of white thugs intimidating minorities while chanting Trump, or swastika graffiti accompanied by the words, "Make America Great Again." So here's Donald Trump, a man with no ideology, no principles, an empty vessel. Is he a racist? Is he a misogynistic predator? Is he a xenophobe? Is he an anti-Semite? Is he an all-around bigot? Let me provide you with a very condensed expert definition of sociopath. Sociopaths are professional liars. They fabricate stories and make outlandish, untruthful statements. Because they have practiced lying so much, they are able to make these lies sound convincing. As their experience with lying grows, so does their confidence and assertiveness in telling their lies. Sometimes their lies are stories to get sympathy. Others are lies about the work they've done. Sociopaths have no typical feelings of guilt associated with claiming someone else's work as their own. They only care about their image and will do whatever is easiest to create. Now, maybe it doesn't matter whether Trump is a sociopath. It's not what's in his head, if anything. It's the words he chooses, the actions he takes. And so whom did Trump appoint as his chief strategist? Of course, Stephen Bannon, a man who's made nice with white supremacists and neo-Nazis, and he turned the very conservative website Breitbart into a mouthpiece for what a Breitbart editor called, and I quote, a cesspool for white supremacist meme makers. Former Breitbart writer Ben Shapiro is quoted as saying, Bannon allowed the site to be taken over and used by people who are not fond of Jews, not fond of minorities. So Bannon used Breitbart, as he himself put it, as a voice for the alt-right. And let's not even get into Sebastian Gorka, the Hungarian Trump aide caught wearing the Vizsérem lapel pins, a group that was allied with the Nazis during World War II. After the election, an article in Politico quoted Bannon as saying, this whole movement is really the top of the first inning. So what inning are we in now? If you think Bannon's and Gorka's exits from the White House will have any positive effect on Trump's behavior and views, that would be wrong. It's Trump's view, Trump's behavior, and Trump's bigotry that are at the root of what he says and what he does. Not Bannon's, not Gorka's. They, like the rest of the alt-right, simply feel emboldened and feed upon his sickness. By the way, Gorka's wife, Catherine, she's still serving the White House in a very influential Department of Homeland Security position. In early 2016, Matthew Hambach, who's head of the Traditionalist Youth Network, that's a group that the ADL has called a small white supremacist group, described Donald Trump as the, and I quote, gateway drug to outright white nationalism. He's exactly right. He said it perfectly. Let's talk about college campuses and the rise of the alt-right there. I think it's very illustrative of the larger society. The sheer volume of campuses that have been hit with white nationalist flyers and speakers points to a very concerted effort on the part of the radical right to view young people as recruiting targets. At the University of Massachusetts, Boston, for example, flyers for Identity Europa, which is an organization founded last year by Nathan D'Amigo, were posted across campus. D'Amigo is quoted as saying, "What corporation doesn't go to colleges to recruit? These are the people who will go on to manage the institutions of our country, and we want them in our networks." And what's more, according to Jared Taylor of American Renaissance, another white nationalist group that openly focuses on efforts on college campuses, it's a good time to recruit. There's a rising sense of frustration and outright anger, they say, with this characterization of all whites as privileged, oppressive, and essentially evil. So I think there is a greater willingness among young whites to strike back at this oppressive orthodoxy. Richard Spencer, the white supremacist I mentioned earlier, and I'm sure all of you know who Richard Spencer is. He had an interesting time down in Florida. Believes college students are perfect recruits for white nationalist groups. Spencer believes that people in college are at this point in their lives where they're actually open to alternative perspectives for better or for worse. I do think you need to get them while they're young. In December, he gave a speech on the campus of Texas A&M University, and he said this in other places since. He said this, "America belongs to white men." Many of the white supremacy flyers don't even contain overtly offensive language. One Identity Europa poster simply features a photo of a classical statue and the phrase, "Protect your heritage." That's a dog whistle for white and European. So in discussing Identity Europa, D'Amigo said this, we've discovered that there are many people who already have read our website, who already agree with us, but haven't taken that next step to get involved or meet with other people. We're already in the process of purchasing tables and banner stands and brochures so that next semester we can get started on campuses and putting more of a face on this, which they are doing. So whether it's a college campus or a local bar, the recruiting targets of the white supremacy movement are there, and they're subject to persuasion. So what can we do to mitigate the hate and maybe change the inner soul of our country? Speak up in the community. It's all about community. Work in the community. When you hear attacks on immigrants, LGBT individuals, American Muslims, racial and religious minorities, whoever the others may be, say something. Don't let it go unanswered. SPLC recently put out a book called 10 Ways to Fight Hate. You can find it online and see it in some detail. I'm going to go through the 10 ways very quickly, not describe them, just list them. Act, join forces, support the victims, speak up, educate yourself, create an alternative, pressure leaders, stay engaged, teach acceptance, dig deeper. I like Dr. King's advice. If you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, you have to keep moving forward. Our slogan at the Southern Poverty Law Center, at our Civil Rights Memorial Center, is "The March Continues." I want to end with a quote that I think is especially important in this era of Trump, Sessions, Miller, anti-Muslim immigration restrictions, DACA repeal, and general xenophobia. America has never been united by blood or birth or soil. We are bound by ideals that move us beyond our backgrounds, lift us above our interests, and teach us what it means to be citizens. Every child must be taught these principles. Every citizen must uphold them. And every immigrant, by embracing these ideals, makes our country more, not less, American. We all came here for a reason. Juntos podemos. Together we can. Make America not just wealthy, but generous and just. George W. Bush, 2001. Thank you. Let's ask Yeah, I'm pretty good. Yeah. Should I go back down? Okay.
I'm not sure what I can say to follow that keynote presentation, but what I would like to say is that as much as I am humbled by our keynote this morning, appreciative of the contributions, the wisdom, the length of commitment that he and many of you have put into this effort, I would also like to recognize the people who have put together this conference for all of us so that we can continue down that path. If I could ask the planning committee for the conference to please stand, it would be Tony Stewart, Dean Lynch, Jim Moore, Joanne Smeha. And then if I could ask you to remain standing and also ask the board members of the Gonzaga Institute for Hate Studies, the board members of the Kootenai County Task Force for Human Relations, and the board members of the Spokane County Human Rights Task Force. These folks are also some of the critical leaders in our community who have made this conference possible, and I'd like to say thank you. Thank you very much for being such important people. We're going to start our next session at 15 after. We have one additional option for you to choose from. There are 4 concurrent sessions during each of the segments during the conference. And Mr. Levin has agreed to kindly stay in this room and to be available to answer a few questions as well if you'd like to speak with him. He is leaving on a plane early this afternoon, but if you'd like to ask him a question, he's been very gracious in making that offer. I would like to leave you just with a thought that we are an institution of higher education, that we are a Jesuit institution, that we have a commitment to meeting people in their context. We have a commitment to dialogue. We have a commitment to listen for the purpose of learning. And I hope that what you find is this conference provides you opportunity to further develop those skills and that knowledge as you move forward throughout the conference and throughout the work that you do. Thank you very much. Enjoy the conference.